The debate over coffee is still ongoing. There are people who say that coffee is very healthy, and these are coffee advocates, or maybe just coffee addicts. There are other folks who don't drink coffee at all and say it's harmful, and they're probably right in some ways. Because for some, coffee really does trigger heartburn, high blood pressure, or ultimately a trip to the bathroom. So today, let's settle this once and for all with new data on this wonderful or terrible drink. Probably one of the most important studies in recent years, which definitely deserves special attention, is a study dedicated to coffee. And on one hand, coffee's a wonderful drink, and some people just love the taste. On the other hand, coffee still has an effect on our bodies, and denying that is simply impossible. Look at how this story goes. It turns out that according to new data, and I've mentioned this many times, coffee, just your morning cup, is like a gardener, a secret gardener for our gut. And coffee doesn't just wake us up, it also wakes up the beneficial bacteria in our gut. And a new large-scale study involving several thousand people found a direct link between regular coffee consumption and an increase in the amount in the gut of a specific, particular, certain type of gut bacteria called Otoribacteriaca. Otoribacteria, remember that name, because they are extremely necessary and extremely beneficial. And this discovery, well, at first glance, probably just changes the view of coffee from a simple stimulant to a potential prebiotic that can shape the health of our gut and our microbiome. Now, in general, we remember that the human gut contains about 100 trillion bacteria. 100 trillion is a huge number. It's hard to imagine where else you could encounter such a quantity. And it even exceeds the number of all our own cells in our body by 10 times. So probably the absolute and undeniable fact is that you have to look after your microflora. And so your cup of coffee is one of the main tools for influencing this community invisible to the eye. So what did the study ultimately find? The study found that coffee is a wonderful fertilizer for good bacteria. Who would have thought? Scientists analyzed huge cohorts and data from people, studied their diet, microbiome composition from stool samples, and it turned out that the more coffee a person consumes, regardless of whether it was caffeinated or decaffeinated coffee, the higher their level of bacteria was. In the gut, those bacteria that belong to the Otoribacteriaca family. You might wonder, why is this important? Why the sudden talk about these bacteria? Well, because bacteria from this family are known for their ability to produce butyrate. But butyrate isn't some kind of illegal substance. It's a substance that our body definitely needs, or rather, not even our body, but our gut microflora. This is a short-chain fatty acid. We usually always talk about saturated fatty acids, unsaturated ones. Well, all these fatty acids we're talking about are long-chain ones. But there are a few short-chain ones, and that's why we almost always lack them. And so butyrate is that very short-chain fatty acid that is the main source of energy for the cells of our intestinal lining. That's the main thing about this butyrate and the oloribacter that produces it. And a sufficient amount of butyrate strengthens the intestinal walls, prevents increased permeability syndrome or increased epithelial permeability, or as many nutritionist bloggers call it, leaky gut syndrome. And this is linked to many inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. By the way, if you didn't know, 1 cup of coffee contains basically about 1,000 different biologically active compounds. These are polyphenols, antioxidants, and many others. And many of these 1,000 substances are actually not digested directly and can't be used by our body in any way. But at the same time, they serve as food specifically for our gut bacteria. And coffee, in essence, is a complex cocktail of different prebiotics. Well, let's get back to Otobacteria. What is it exactly, and what are these coffee lovers inside of us? And in general, bacteria of this family are one of the main producers of butyrates in our gut. And butyrate is not just fuel for the gut. It also has a powerful anti-inflammatory effect. That is, if there's inflammation somewhere, it puts it out. And it even plays a certain role in regulating both immunity and appetite. And maybe you've noticed that people who drink more coffee seem to get colds less often. And those who drink coffee seem to have a better situation with their weight. They don't suffer from overeating or anything else. So the bacteria had a hand in this too. So these very odobacteria, they specialize in fermenting complex dietary fibers and polyphenols, which are exactly what's in coffee. It turns out we drink coffee, give them these necessary substances, and this specific type and genus of bacteria grow in larger numbers. And if there are fewer of these bacteria, and their level is low, and they produce less butyrate, then this situation in the gut is definitely linked to inflammatory bowel diseases and irritable bowel syndrome, and with colitis and with obesity, and even with the risk of colorectal cancer. But one study in 2023 showed that people with high levels of these odorobacterium have a 40% lower risk of developing ulcerative colitis, and that's a severe inflammatory autoimmune bowel disease. 40% is a big number. But here you'll ask me, well, surely there's a difference between different coffee varieties, how they affect these bacteria differently? Of course there are. Well, the first difference that comes to mind is, of course, caffeinated coffee and decaf, so-called decaffeinated coffee. And here is one of the most important findings of the study. The benefit for the microbiome doesn't depend on caffeine. No. So it doesn't matter if the coffee is caffeinated or decaf, that's not the point. The beneficial effect on the gut isn't from the caffeine itself, but from other components in coffee. For example, chlorogenic acids, or melanoids and melanoidins, diterpenes. Basically, the substances that give coffee its flavor and dark color during roasting. So if, for instance, someone is sensitive to caffeine or has, say, high blood pressure, which caffeine affects, they can switch to high-quality decaf coffee, and they will likely get the same benefits for their gut bacteria. How does it actually work? The process is complex on one hand, but on the other, it's easy to explain. Look, you drink coffee, and it contains many indigestible polyphenols and fiber components. By the way, if you drink coffee with the grounds, that's the super healthy, highly concentrated fiber right there. Then, we will definitely get more benefits than if we just drank it without the grounds. You can drink a little bit of it. Anyway, so you've drunk your coffee. Since these components aren't digested, they reach the large intestine, where all the bacteria live, completely intact. And then these bacteria from the Odoribacter family, and some others, use these substances as food. And as a result of eating and fermenting these coffee substances, they're able to produce butyrate. And butyrate, in turn, nourishes gut cells, reduces inflammation, strengthens the protective barrier, and that's how we get the benefits. And those melanoidins formed during coffee roasting, they actually act similarly to dietary fiber, meaning they aren't digested themselves. But again, they stimulate the growth of beneficial bifidobacteria, and the darker the roast, the more melanoidins there are. So dark coffee lovers might be happy to hear that, those who like a strong roast. Is there any way to further boost the benefits of coffee to make it truly amazing? Well, maybe it matters when you drink it. Well, again, studies show that drinking coffee after a meal might be better for the microbiome than drinking it on an empty stomach. We're not talking about all the other effects right now, just specifically regarding the gut. Next question. Could instant coffee be worse than ground coffee? It would seem that ground coffee is natural while instant coffee is, well, less healthy. How is instant coffee made? They take ready-made coffee, brew it, and then they dry it. And that's how you get instant. Then we just add the water back in and it becomes this tasty drink. Well, it's a matter of taste, but it seems some properties might be lost. Some are, yes. But let's compare. If we take freshly ground coffee brewed in a sesve, or a French press, or an espresso made in a machine, it certainly contains more polyphenols and oils than instant coffee. And here, it's as if this conclusion was already obvious. Well, at the same time, it's confirmed by research. So for maximum benefit, it's better to choose whole bean coffee and brew it, without any filter bags or, in general, filters that can trap the nutrients. For example, some people run coffee through a paper filter and a drip coffee maker. And then all the oily substances and polyphenols stay on that filter, and in the actual liquid we drink, nothing is left. So it's better, of course, not to filter your coffee. And in that sense, it will healthier for you. And most importantly, don't overdo it. Although the study found that more coffee means more beneficial bacteria, there is still a limit. So, moderation, well, 3, 4, maybe 5. Mugs or cups of coffee a day remains the key principle, and too much coffee for some people can lead to what? To an excess of microbes. If we overstimulate the gut, bacterial overgrowth will occur, so excess is also harmful. And this doesn't just apply to coffee, it applies to probiotics too. If someone already has an overgrowth of gut flora and keeps taking probiotics, then they'll just keep feeling worse and worse. And other studies show that for about 1 in 3 people taking probiotics, they don't help, but instead make things worse. This also applies to people who already have some kind of issue. For example, someone with reflux disease, heartburn, or acid reflux, if they drink coffee, then their heartburn might actually increase. So in that situation, you shouldn't drink coffee. You need to treat your heartburn first. Treat your reflux disease, especially since it can be cured completely and permanently. I have a book on this called Evidence-Based Gastroenterology, which describes the treatment in detail, and also the book Stomach Wars. In Stomach Wars, everything is detailed about the fight for the stomach and against heartburn, and also against atrophy, ulcers, and everything else. So we see that too much coffee can negate the benefits due to bacterial overgrowth and by triggering heartburn in those who already suffer from it. And for people who are easily overstimulated, it can also disrupt sleep. That's also not very good, by the way. And finally, let's just say that coffee is not a panacea. I mean, a healthy microbiome primarily requires not just a lot of beneficial bacteria, but a wide variety of them. And so coffee is, well, a perfectly fine, wonderful addition to an overall healthy diet, which is rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and other fermented foods, like kefir, sauerkraut, and many others. And here it is. He or get. Bad coffee's an it, but good coffee's a he. It works together with them. So if you drink coffee, well, go ahead, that's great. Just know your limit, and add some other components. Also related to the microbiome, so you don't just grow a single species of Akkermansia in your gut, so that others are there too. So let's draw some conclusions, and I'll ask you some questions, maybe provocative ones, and you can answer them in the comments, and I'll read them, and through that, we'll find some interesting pattern together, or I'll just answer your questions in the next video. So we need to move from feeling guilty about coffee toward a proper, measured, and mindful pleasure. And that study I mentioned today is yet another strong argument in favor of enjoying a cup of coffee without a shadow of a doubt, instead of drinking it, with some sense of guilt. And it's not just a ritual to perk up, it's actually an action, a real action, to take care of our largest and most influential organ in the body, the microbiome. So let me ask you, could this mass love for coffee be a secret conspiracy by the coffee corporations that produce this drink? Or do you still think it's a conspiracy theory? Because there's always someone who writes, oh, you sold out for coffee, the coffee. Companies are paying you. Or, on the contrary, the tea companies had a falling out with you. Right, of course it's a joke, my friends. We're not naming any brands here. We're talking about coffee in general. I'll definitely make a video about tea as well, because it also has certain properties. Some beneficial, some not so much. So could it be that those people who drink a lot of coffee on a massive scale are actually preventing certain diseases in specific cultures or populations, like those related to the gut? Maybe in the future, coffee will become one of the recommended dietary elements, or even a component of a therapeutic diet, beneficial for health. What do you think about that? Do you even like coffee? Do you drink a lot of it, or just a little? Write down how many cups you consume and which kind you might prefer. Caffeinated, decaf, or maybe ground. or on the other hand, instant coffee. So let's form both an action plan and a final thought. First, drink coffee mindfied, and choose, of course, high quality, preferably whole bean. And it's better not to filter it. Second, don't be afraid of decaf coffee. It's not just artificial junk. People usually say, it's artificial junk. No, decaf coffee retains all its beneficial properties except for the caffeine itself, which it really doesn't have. So you'll still get the benefits for your gut. Next, don't drink coffee with sugar, and especially not with artificial sweeteners. There's a separate video on the channel about artificial sweeteners, be sure to watch it. They can feed your bacteria harmful substances and completely negate all the benefits. Some sugar substitutes and sweeteners can even cause diarrhea or the growth of harmful microflora. And of course, you should pair coffee with a balanced diet that's high in fiber. But too much fiber is also bad. I'll make a separate video about that too. So, our morning coffee isn't just a drink. It's a whole, well, you could say, ecosystem in a cup that helps support the other ecosystem that's inside of us. So drink your coffee, don't worry, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for the next video. There'll be plenty more useful tips there. See you soon. Bye-bye. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your coffee drinking friends. Maybe they don't even know about these beneficial properties yet. Well, that's all for now.